This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Walmart Business is in the business of helping your business. Regardless of whether you're building bridges, building spreadsheets, or building lesson plans. Ooh, that looks fun. Walmart Business can help save you time, money, and hassle so you can focus on what you're building instead of what your supply closet is missing. In short, we take care of business so you can do more with yours. We're the Walmart you love, now for your business. Learn more at business.walmart.com.
You're listening to Dr. Emma and me on the Tutors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. And now, here are your hosts.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Well, I'm Rebecca Larson, and I am joined again by my partner in crime, the Thelma to my Louise, Dr. Emma. Welcome.
Hi, Rebecca. I did send you a song today that mentions Thelma Louise. Did you listen to it?
I didn't. I was busy listening to my rock music before we recorded.
Maybe you can check it out later. I think it's going to be one of the summer hits. I'm like, when this time of year comes around, I listen to some new music to see what's going to be, the summer hits. I like to be in tune with the current world.
You're so young and hip.
Not young, but hip. Yes.
Yes, I am hip.
Just hip. Just hip from now on. Thank you.
Well, if you are listening or watching right now and you're new to the show, this is the Thursday edition of the Tutors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. We call this Dr. Emma and Me, and we have been doing a parallel live series, which has been extremely popular with the listeners. And there's kind of been a theme going on with this whole thing, and you have an exhibition coming up, and maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yes, I do want to talk about that. So I've been using your podcast to promote my exhibition, Rebecca. No, it's a joke, but it's kind of true. And it just makes sense because when someone's researching in a specific topic, and you guys know I do lots of study on women and art and how they construct their image of power. Well, this exhibition is about that. So, when I was thinking about parallel lives, I guess just because my research is all about these women, I realized I was picking up the women from the exhibition. So we have talked a lot about these women that are going to be in the exhibition Faces for Eternity that will be open on this Thursday, July the 10th. Yeah,
yes, but
museum. I wrote it down because people want to know, in the Money Gallery, room 68, case 10.
Okay, so if you're listening, you're really confused because this is going to air after the opening.
Oh,
it's still opening.
Yes. Then you're late, and you should come as quick as possible to the British Museum. It'll be open until October, so you guys have time.
Yeah,
it's just very exciting for me because I'm going to London tomorrow.
Yes.
Yes, to be there. I will be seeing a lot of people. I'm not going to say who.
Oh my gosh. We have so much exciting stuff, I think, planned while you're over there. And you're not just going to England, you're going to Spain too.
Yes. Every summer I go to Spain. It's part of a tradition now to make sure that my daughter gets to spend the summer in my hometown, Santander. So we'll be doing that this summer too, because I always sacrifice for my children.
Oh, you are what a mother.
Oh, yes, I'm the best mother there ever was. You're right.
I always sacrifice. Oh my gosh.
Nice to be back home. We have a big party on St. James. That's our patron. St. James, yes, Santiago. We have great fireworks, but when I was a kid, it was mostly the fireworks, but it's turned into this 1 week party that, everybody comes to now from all over Spain. So, we're like a big party in Spain. What am I going to say?
It sounds to me like I imagine it like during Tudor times when they had like wine flowing in the streets and bonfires. And isn't that what it's like?
Yeah. And I think that one of the reasons how I got into this art patronage and all that is because one of the first things I studied was negotiations of marriages, but those come associated with parties in London and Madrid and other places because you have to convince your subjects that those are good ideas.
Yeah.
And the descriptions of the parties are so good. They had fountains where the wine was flowing in London for the wedding of Arthur and Catherine of Aragon. Imagine how popular you become when you've been the bride to the wedding with the wine coming out of a fountain all day long. I mean, you become pretty popular, yes. And Catherine of Aragon and Arthur Tudor's wedding was my first approach to the Tudors and those things linked between material culture we have in museums, but also like all the tales we have from that time because the chronicles and there's just great descriptions. So if you have a good imagination, which most listeners of this podcast will have, you need to read those. They're fun. They're fun to read through.
Yeah, exactly. When you get a feel for what it was like, that's always the best.
And a lot of them are downloadable. And I mean, you have to be a bit savvy knowing where the sources are, but there's a lot of them and they're long. Some of them are long. So it's going to, if you need something to read this summer and you want to get into that, maybe download one of those and, read about parties in the Tudor time.
Yeah,
that's how I started getting into the Tudors. They were partiers. They were good partiers.
Yeah, they were. I actually have a couple books, or at least one book that is like descriptions of something during. I'll have to share that in the show notes so that if anybody wants to go.
Sydney Anglo was really the person to put the ceremonial. We call it partying, ceremonial. It's all part of the same game, right? It's the celebration, is the gathering of people, is the showcasing the wealth, the magnificence in London, and I'm going there. Oh, I'm so excited every time I go to London. It's special to me.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing city. It's huge, and there are so many people. That's all I remember from my trip into London. I was only there for a day, but there are just people everywhere. And of course, I was also there in like June, so super tourist season, I'm sure. And
it's always busy. It's always busy because there's tourists, there's people living there. There's, so many people there for so many reasons, including yourself or myself, right?
Yeah.
So everyone feels welcome because it's just so diverse. And that was the first big city that I ever visited. My grandmother took me when I was a teenager.
Oh, wow.
And I just, I've just been in love with it ever since.
It is like a melting pot of culture, isn't it?
Yes. And then you become obsessed with a certain character from time because you're doing your research, and then she happened to live there a lot of her life. But then I realized when I was doing my research that a lot of people didn't know that Baynard's castle was her castle. Talking again about Catherine of Aragon, or that Hans Holbein probably painted a lot of his paintings that he did for Catherine in Baynard's castle involving fungi.
That's
It was
right.
in charge of the parties and the Tudor
Henry
court.
Guilford.
Yes, Henry Guilford, who was painted by Holbein, for example. So
that's another fantastic painting.
Yes, but we're not talking about Catherine of Aragon. Well, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have a feeling there's going to be some talk about Catherine of Aragon today. We can reveal what the topic of Parallel Lives is today if you want to before the guest joins us.
Oh, I'm so excited. So today we're going to talk about two women that will be featured heavily in the exhibition because they are the first ruling queens of England. Mary I and Elizabeth I, famous sisters buried together in Westminster Abbey, confronted for centuries, but praised both, and more Elizabeth over time. But I think Mary is having a comeback. Will she ever be as popular as Elizabeth?
No.
I don't think so.
No.
But is Mary making a comeback, and are people, because they admire Elizabeth, realize that Mary was part of Elizabeth's upbringing and her education? We need to look more sympathetically towards her sister who opened the door for her to rule.
Yeah. This was one of those episodes that I wasn't really sure I wanted to do because they're sisters. So obviously there's parallels in their lives, but the more I dug into it and looked at their lives, the more interesting it became to me. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion today.
I think what is happening is each individual episode is not isolated from the rest. And we've already had a guest. So we have a guest today. We know what that entails. It's not just talking about parallels. It's digging deep in what this person knows about usually a person they're a specialist in, but when they're rethinking things through the lens of someone who was similar, but at the same time so different, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, they were very similar, but they were so different too.
Yes, they were. That is.
So, um, and they, they're buried together.
I know, but only one has an effigy.
But they're buried together
That's true.
forever and ever,
That's right. Like sisters.
like sisters. That's
Yeah.
what it says, right?
Yes. Well,
Oh, I'm getting excited
I
now.
know. I'm really looking forward to this. So I think it's time to head on over and talk to our guest.
Yes.
Hello and welcome back. Well, as we just said, we're here to welcome a guest to the show, and this guest has never been on the show before, and I'm just so excited to talk to her today. But I'm going to let Dr. Emma introduce our guest today.
Hi, everyone. So, I mean, everybody knows because if you're watching the video, which you should be doing, Rebecca's been telling you to watch the videos. We have Carole Levin today here. Hi, Carole. How are you?
I am so excited to be here with both of you. This is a really wonderful experience for me.
So when I was thinking about parallel lives, one of the ones that came to, I mean, the first person I thought of, one of the first people I thought of was Elizabeth I. And of course I had to ask Carole to come if I was thinking, because she just wrote one of the books that has influenced me so much, The Heart and Stomach of a King. And she will be talking a bit about why she chose all of that. But she's got a long trajectory and she's doing very exciting things right now that she's going to be talking to us about. She's one of my mentors. I am editing a book in her series. She's just an amazing person and one of the best Tudor scholars there is. So I'm so excited about you being here, Carole, today. Thank you for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. I love talking about Queen Elizabeth and Emma ever since we met at the Newberry about 3 years ago. It's
Yes.
such a pleasure getting to know your work and how wonderful it is, and such a pleasure getting to know Rebecca. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Yes.
We're very excited to have you here.
Very excited. So you are our Elizabeth I expert, and we're doing parallel lives with Elizabeth I and Mary I. So Emma is going to be our Mary I experts on today's episode, and I'm just going to sit back and enjoy my coffee and just.
Well, Carole is helping me to become a Mary I expert because I am editing a book that will be published in Queenship of Power series she edits, which addresses for the first time what we know about Mary I's artistic patronage. And Carole knows and has published so much about Elizabeth's artistic patronage, cultural patronage, especially too, so there's a lot of crossover. And to me, what's more important is how she has thought about gender and being a queen and things like that. It's more profound for me, Carole's work, in the sense of just the Tudors. It's her perspective, her gender perspective that has always had a bigger impact in my work, than just, she studies Elizabeth I. Is the things she studies about Elizabeth I that I find cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, where do we start on the parallel lives today? There's so many parallels between these two women. Do we just start from the point where Henry VIII marries Anne Boleyn, or where do we start?
I think that's a great place to point is a start, but I'm actually, as I always do, we're starting here and then we're going a little bit back from there.
Yes.
And, I would just say that when Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon, and he married her as soon as he became king, he was a few months short of his 18th birthday. Mm-hmm. They were crowned together. And it was very much Henry's decision to marry Catherine. Mm-hmm. She, of course, had been at the court for years as Prince Arthur's widow. Mm-hmm. But even though the plan had been for him to marry Catherine when he grew older, Henry VII also had various other negotiations about potential marriages. When Henry was about 14, he had Henry swear he wasn't bound to marry Catherine. So when he became king, it was very much his choice. He said Henry VII on his deathbed told him to marry Catherine, but I have to say I never believe much of what Henry said because he so often twisted the truth. So I think I don't know that his father was worrying about that on his deathbed, but Henry clearly made the decision, and I think he made it because he got to marry a woman he knew, as opposed to a bride he'd never seen. And at first in his marriage, he was really happy. He called himself the loyal heart. He was thrilled when Catherine got pregnant. And then, of course, there was a miscarriage, but there was so little known about pregnancy and medical health at that time that the doctor said, "Oh, was carrying twins, so she still is pregnant with a baby." And then months later, and they actually had a beautiful cradle ready. And then some months later, it was very clear that she was no longer pregnant. And then, of course, she did get pregnant again and had their son, Henry, born I believe, on January 1st of 1511.
Mm-hmm.
And Henry was elated, and then the boy died at only 7 weeks.
Yeah.
So by the time he had Mary, I think he was already pretty disenchanted with his marriage to Catherine. She was older, she was much more serious than him, especially after having gone through those miscarriages. And so even though, and Emma can talk about this too, he created Mary as Princess of Wales, he also gave his illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, the son of Elizabeth Blunt, made him Duke of Richmond. And as Henry himself once said, the most important role for a king is on the battlefield. And I'm quoting Henry now, the battlefield is unmeet for women's imbecilities, end quote.
Mm.
Yes. I would say it's absolutely unmeet for men's imbecilities too, but that's another issue. So clearly Henry was, and of course it's a great irony because his one son he does have dies very young and never really rules. And then the last half century, there's 5 years of Mary's reign and over 44 years of Elizabeth's. But Henry, I think, felt overwhelmingly the need to have a legitimate male heir. And this was very, very hard for Catherine and very hard on Mary. But I think Henry was thinking about this seriously before his great infatuation with Anne Boleyn. It wasn't like, oh, I met Anne, I've got to get a divorce and marry her. I think it was, oh, I have to have a son. And Anne was smart enough to realize that being the king's mistress was not a great career move. She'd seen it with her sister Mary, and I think she clearly picked up Henry was thinking of having the marriage annulled and thought, why should he marry a French princess? He could marry me. And she worked very hard to make that happen. And of course, if Elizabeth had been a boy, England's history would have been very, very different. But of course, when he married Anne, having broken with the Catholic Church, Mary was declared illegitimate. It was declared in the Act of Succession that it was treason to advocate for her. But in terms of parallel lives, his marriage to Anne Boleyn lasted less than 3 years. And
Right.
well, about 3 years. And Elizabeth was under 3 at the time of the execution of her mother, which was a terrible tragedy. And I am not alone in this. I'm convinced that Anne Boleyn did not take any lovers, far from the 5 lovers, including her own brother that she was accused of, and the 5
Yeah.
men who were executed with her. But the parallel is that the next act of succession declared Elizabeth also illegitimate, and it was treason also to declare her an heir
Right.
to the throne. So there is, I think, from the very beginning, a real parallel between Mary and Elizabeth. Do you want to add anything to that, Emma? I keep chattering.
Yes, I was thinking that, as much as I always advocate for Mary, in terms of when you were talking about childhood, Mary, even though her father wasn't happy when she was born because she wasn't a boy, she did grow educated by her mother, under her mother's wing. Elizabeth didn't have that. She went through trauma right from the beginning of her life because she was thrown into this desperation at being a toddler. When imagine your father, accuses your mother of these things and then declares you illegitimate and all these things when you're only like 2 years old. Mary was already,
7.
she was older, it was different. And she had had those years as a child, protected by her mother, to become, a different type of person. But I think in that sense, Elizabeth, those traumatic experiences were always with her later on in life, because she was always wary, right? She was very alone. That's what I mean. And I think,
Yes.
you think that's one of the reasons why she didn't want to marry? She felt she had to just do it on her own.
I want to respond to that, and I think you're so right. And we know, I don't know that Elizabeth would have any memory of it, but the last time she was with her mother's holding her, begging Henry to treat her better. And when, after her mother's execution, she actually asked, and here she is, under 3 years old, and she said, "Why was I Princess Elizabeth yesterday, and today I'm Lady Elizabeth?" So she was very aware. But in terms of knowing what happened to her mother, we don't know definitely how she learned that. But my own guess is that not only, of course, did Henry have his second wife executed for adultery and treason, but he had his fifth wife and
Yes.
young cousin Catherine Howard, and Elizabeth was then 8 years old. And I
Yeah.
think that the gossip around when Catherine was also accused and executed, everyone must have been saying, "Oh, that's just like Anne Boleyn." And if Elizabeth didn't know before that, I think she definitely knew at the age of 8. And another reason why I think so is that Robert Dudley says as an adult, "I've known her since she was 8 years old, and she told me then she would never marry." Robert obviously tried everything he could to change her mind
Right.
unsuccessfully. But I think that's a very interesting insight into Elizabeth, that as a child she had made that decision.
I think that's very interesting too, and I see a parallel not so much maybe with Mary, but other women of the Spanish monarchy, especially after they become widows, where they declare they want to become religious nuns and things like that. Sometimes
Yes,
it was a woman's way to have control and power, just to not have, because once you were married, the man had power over you, right?
absolutely. And I think that was in a sense not exactly a parallel, but a lesson for Elizabeth, because when Mary first became queen, and
Exactly. Yeah.
Mary was actually so thrilled and delighted, she was actually very kind to Elizabeth at first, and then that all fell apart. But I think Elizabeth saw that the pressure on Mary to marry was so strong, and of course
Yeah.
she marries her cousin Philip of Spain.
Yeah.
Even with the negotiations and what everything was worked out, people kept talking about King Philip. He's, as if he were the ruler and Mary was
Yeah.
simply his wife. And I think Elizabeth saw that and thought, "Oh, there's no way I want to give over power," once she became queen.
You
Uh,
can't blame her. What do you think, Rebecca?
she was very funny about that. I mean, she said, "I will have one mistress here and no master," to Robert Dudley when he presumed too much.
As much as I am a Mary specialist, I identify more with that mentality that Elizabeth had, because I always think, maybe I've never talked about this in the podcast, but I always think if I lived in the 16th century, I would become a nun and I'd be an abbess somewhere, because those are where the women with power, the femme soul, the women on their own, right? Like Elizabeth was, and Mary couldn't, because although she had a very short reign, and those are reasons also to explain some of the problems they had. Yes, she does have a power struggle with Philip. The only reason why she doesn't have a bigger power struggle is because Philip is not a king yet. He's made king by Charles V to marry Mary. And
Not
as soon as he can,
actually, Emma, he
yes.
doesn't become king till about a year into their marriage.
Oh,
When,
he's made king of
when
Naples
oh,
first.
King of Naples. Okay, I was going to say he doesn't become king of Spain
Yeah,
until
king of Spain
his,
until later. Yeah, but
his
so that's the
father
thing. He's only
abdicates.
27. He's very young. But as soon as he's king of England and king of Naples, and through his marriage to Mary, he grabs into that power, obviously, and becomes a king in England, like a full king. He reminds me a bit in that parallel to Philip the Fair, Philip the Handsome, and Juana. We've talked about them. We call him Crybaby. Carole.
You do.
I feel very sorry for Juana, and I'm not
Yeah.
pronouncing it
Yes, yes,
correctly,
yes.
but I actually feel very sad for her because, boy, she was betrayed by every man in her family, her father, her
Exactly.
son, her husband, and that's tragic. And I think that in some ways, Mary was really betrayed by Philip in a way that Elizabeth did not want to.
Hmm.
You know, Elizabeth, interestingly enough, and this is where the parallel really breaks down, really had no interest in getting pregnant and having a child. I mean, she was very funny
Same.
about that because she said, well, sometimes even the most beautiful tree has a rotten limb on it. So how do you
Yes.
know that a good woman wouldn't have a bad child?
Right.
And for Mary, her whole reason to, she was 37 when she became queen, and
Hmm.
her whole reason to marry was, of course, to have a son who could rule after her. And the tragedy of that and the tragedy of the false pregnancies that she suffered from were very intense. And Philip, he was 10 years younger than he, and he apparently privately made fun of Mary and her affection for him. Um, when he was married to her, which is atrocious.
Like most men did, because there's so many quotes about Henry mocking his wives too, Henry VIII. That's why we
Absolutely.
always mock him in this podcast because he used to say,
What do we
"Yes,
wait, what do
yes."
we call him, Emma?
We call him the tool. We call him the tool.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I really couldn't. I will just say about Henry, and of course, there's a lot of different scholarly arguments about him, but Suzanne Lipscott, wrote it was basically the fall when, in 1536, and that's what changed his
Yes,
personality. And I think it may have exasperated it, but I think his personality was incredibly clear from the moment he became king. For example, his execution of Empson and Dudley, which was totally invented. I mean,
hmm,
he just thought they're hated, that people will love me if I kill them. And it was an atrocious thing to do right from the start. And his lack of sympathy for Catherine with the miscarriages and stillbirths. So I think he was a terrible man forever and ever.
I think his ambition. I think he found himself in a good situation because Catherine brought the Spanish alliance and all those international contacts, and he thought himself as a European player for some time. And then Charles was elected emperor, Holy
Yes, he
Roman
actually wanted
Emperor.
to be elected emperor, which was
Exactly.
crazy.
And he had the little fight with Francis the First and Francis One, and he grew a beard, and he was having a midlife crisis before at 32, because that was when there was midlife, and he grows a beard. Catherine doesn't like it, so Catherine, for always say she was very tame and all that, she would be like, "No, I don't like that." You can, who dares to say that to Henry VIII? And I think in that sense, Mary had. I don't think Elizabeth had that time. Maybe I don't know. Maybe Carole, you can tell us about her relationship with her father. But Mary did have a confrontational relationship with her father, and would answer back and would say, and Henry was very close to taking care of Mary, if you know what I mean. And that's what the concern was. And the imperial ambassador was like, she needs to take it down a notch because she was dragged through castles. She was beaten up. She
Well,
was,
Risley said he wanted to knock her head against the wall until it turned into a soft apple. And that's a direct quote when he went to talk to her about the king's demands. So,
yeah,
yes, she was getting all sorts of advice about you've got to slow it down. And her loyalty to her mother was overwhelming. And so it was very hard for her. And I think, and Emma, you may disagree with me, but I think she felt intense guilt that she finally was forced to say that she accepted the annulment. I don't think she ever did, but to
she
say,
did. She had to do it.
and I think the guilt just ate her up because she
It
had
did.
such
It
love
did.
and admiration for her mother. I think Elizabeth had great love for her mother too, though she never really knew her,
Right.
but she also knew she couldn't really speak of that very openly. But I think if we look at how she treated all her Boleyn
Right.
relatives,
Yes.
and if we look at, for example, at her coronation, when she does the progression through London, and there's one of the kind of expeditions is Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, and then Henry VIII and her mother, and then Elizabeth. So I think she can. And of course, she has the ring, which is discovered in the court of when James becomes king, and they're looking
Yes.
at all the jewelry, and of course it has the E on the outside, but when you open it, it has um, the miniature of her mother and of her
Mm.
inside. So I think she cared very much, but I think she recognized that she had to be very careful. But she did have quite a confrontational relationship with Henry too, and I think Henry was terrifying to Elizabeth.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to make a point here because I think it's so interesting when we look at the Tudors because we know how Henry VII became King of England. And from that point, he really wanted to hold on and continue the dynasty, right? We didn't have that really as much with the Plantagenets. But when the Tudors came around, it was like, we need to hold on to this dynasty. We need to stay in
Mhm.
power. That pressure went to Henry, which then went to Edward, which went to Mary, which went to Elizabeth in the end. And that's the part to me that I just go, wow, the amount of pressure that they all must have felt. And their behavior aside, because obviously Henry's behavior was not good. I'd like to think of that human aspect of it. Like, just imagine how they felt. I'm going to be the one who's going to end the Tudor dynasty if I don't have a son, if I don't have offspring. It's
And I think that's when he had this biggest disagreement with his wife, Catherine, because his wife said, well, remember my mother, Isabel in Castile. She
Exactly.
ruled. So that was the first disagreement they had, of course, because as soon as Mary was thriving and living, Catherine was determined, well, she'll be the next queen because there's
Yes.
no Salic war law in England, so it can be. Matilda tried, it couldn't, but now we are in the Renaissance, and with the right education, Henry will come around because it's the only way. That's what, and again, I quote a lot. This Providence has decided that the next Queen of England is a woman. It's Mary, and I think that that determination that her mother had carried with Mary and carried with Elizabeth, because once you see a president like that, your self esteem grows too. You're like, okay, my sister did it, and now it's my turn. When Elizabeth's turn, what was she going to do when her sister died? She had to take the reins of the monarchy, and she did. And then she was very successful because she was very ready. Because she had, women when they get the shot, they're pretty good at it.
I think Elizabeth, I mean, she had an amazing education and she did a lot even in her early teens to shape that education.
Exactly.
And I think that once her brother had died, I think she saw there was a real chance she would be queen.
Yeah.
But to respond to Rebecca, which is such a good point, and it's one of the reasons I think Henry was so hysterical, if you
Mm-hmm.
forgive me for saying that about him, to have
Mm-hmm.
a legitimate son, was that the Tudors were a new dynasty.
Yeah.
But it's so amazing that for Elizabeth, it wasn't an issue. I mean, I think there was a moment it was during her very last um, marriage negotiation with the Duke of Anjou, who had
Oh,
earlier been
yeah.
the Duke of Alençon. And I think there was a moment when her biological clock was ticking and she thought, this is my very last chance. And she does when the ambassador comes and she's with Anjou and he says, my master the king wants to know your intentions. And she takes off her ring and hands it to Anjou and says, this man will be my husband. And of course, he's elated. But I think by the next day, she's thinking, out that was a big mistake.
He was
And
smart.
she does harangue her council at one point of, you've been telling me for 20 years to get married so I can have an heir, and now I'm ready to do it, and you're not supporting it. So I think there was that one kind of moment when she kind of really thought about it. But otherwise, I mean, she said right from the beginning, I'm going to be a virgin queen, though she loved courtship and loved gifts. Um, and God will take care of it. You don't have to worry about it. And of course,
Providence.
Providence. And of
Yeah.
course, she and England were very lucky because it was a smooth transition to James as opposed to a civil war. But
Oh my goodness, yes.
I think it's fascinating that Elizabeth didn't have this feeling all the other Tudors did of, I must have a son to keep this succession going.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks, or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Visit USAA.com/bundle. Bundle savings are off total premium, not available in all states or in all situations. To qualify, auto policy must be active prior to property policy issue, subject to change. Restrictions apply. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
The McDonald's Snack Wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch Snack Wrap. Spicy Snack Wrap. You broke the internet for a snack. Snack Wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
And I wanted to point out, too, the parallels not only with Mary, but with Catherine of Aragon between Elizabeth, because what I think, talking about Providence, what I think sometimes is we tend to separate them because one was Catholic and the other one was Protestant. But, there's
They were
times.
both very, very strong women. And I would also say about Catherine, and it's one of the reasons she was so beloved, is even though she was Spanish, she made herself into such an English queen who cared about the people. She was, and I think this was, not just a brilliant strategy. I think this was absolutely true. She saw this as her destiny, and she saw this as what she must do. And I think for Elizabeth as well, though I think her rhetoric was always better than her reality, but I think she did truly, truly love her people and valued their love of her. And I think you're absolutely right, Emma. That is a huge parallel between Catherine of Aragon and Queen Elizabeth.
Which parallels with Isabel of Castile, because that's where they both get the idea from, who is also featured in the exhibition. So Elizabeth I is the last one. Isabel, namesake, maybe parallel life, second part, I don't know. Isabel of Castile. I mean, truly the parallel should be with Isabel of Castile. And Elizabeth had pictures of Isabel of Castile.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
That's fascinating.
Had two pictures. One is in the Prado Museum now.
Wow, there's your bomb for this episode, Emma.
Yes, and in those books, she's dressed in cloth of gold, holding the book, thinking. She's represented as a humanist queen. Elizabeth represents herself as a humanist teenager in that amazing portrait where she has a book in front of her. And I want Carole to tell you how much I'm going to work to find out who commissioned all those portraits, because I think the women were so involved in all of this. Catherine Parr, Elizabeth, Mary. When the relationship was flowing, you get these amazing pictures, you get these amazing medals, you get these amazing things. So when women are working together and are in good terms, the art is getting very cool, because that's the time we get the first full-length pictures of queens, like the one of Catherine Parr. And Elizabeth is just studying for this exhibit. Carole, just her fashion, her jewels, her hair. I'm just like blown away, because as you enter the almost a Baroque time, it just gets all so big and theatrical. I love it.
Well, about her jewelry and her clothing, she loved both. And one of the things I think is so interesting is that traditionally people would give, for New Year's gift, the courtiers would give the ruler gold. Often it would be in a beautifully embroidered little purse, but that's what they would give. And Elizabeth, very early in her reign, told her ladies in waiting that, let people know, I don't want gold. I want gifts. I want jewelry. I want clothing.
Bling.
She was actually very specific. At one point, there was a message to Bess of Hardwick like, oh, I think I want a blue dress. Don't send me a red one. And
I love that.
And of course, it's very funny because they were, parallel also. She and Mary.
Yes.
And while Mary, on the one hand, once she was in England, was trying to get Elizabeth assassinated when she first got there, wrote to the Spanish ambassador, said, with your master's help, I'll be Queen of England in 3 months. Mass will be said all over the country. But she also, Mary, was incredibly skilled in embroidery, and she did the most beautiful embroidered gifts for Elizabeth, which she'd send saying, oh, bring me to court, bring me to court.
Right.
And one of the funniest things about clothing, I will just mention about that, is when Mary escapes, and of course, she's only 25, and Elizabeth was 25 when she became queen, and there's Mary, 25 and no longer queen, and she escapes to England. And it's not true because she's then welcomed, and they do have some clothing for her at the castle where she first goes. But she writes to Elizabeth and said, I only have the clothes I left in, that I stand up in. Send me more clothes immediately and then bring me to court. And Elizabeth was really insulted.
Mm.
She is not going to send clothes. So what she ends up doing, and it's really kind of embarrassing, is the clothes she sends are so minimal and not at all fit for a queen. And so when they're opened, Elizabeth's, the guy who went and brought them, he says, "Oh," and Mary's going, "Are you kidding me?" And he says, "Oh, Elizabeth misunderstood. She thought you wanted clothing for your maid."
Oh, bird. Well, Catherine of Aragon does mention once to her dad, I'm in rags. I'm sure she wasn't in rags. It's just at court you had to, and then the way you present it is Elizabeth was very smart, because if Mary comes along dressed like a queen, what's going to happen? People are going to consider her a queen. It's the battle of the appearance and the visual battle that these women have. And speaking of that, and speaking of the exhibition, the portraits, right? The presence of the Queen in so many places. Elizabeth is one of the most portrayed English monarchs of all time, and iconic. Everybody recognizes Elizabeth I. I have several books for my daughter Susan on historical women. Elizabeth is always featured in those.
And well,
she always has an iconic image, right?
But I will say, and I think it's so interesting, Elizabeth said, I just don't want random portraits of me. They have to be approved. And one of the things that I think is fascinating, and I've published on this, but in the 1577 Holinshed's Chronicle, as opposed to the expanded one 10 years later, there is a portrait of every ruler in it. And they're quite amazing. And especially some of the more recent, really, they look like obviously the illustrator had seen actual portraits of Henry VIII and Edward and Mary and so on. The only one who does not get a portrait is Elizabeth. But I think she does have one, and I can show you this at some point. I've done a lot of work. I absolutely love Boudica, the first century Iceni queen, who roused her people to fight the Romans. And I think there's so many parallels with Elizabeth rousing her people to fight the Spanish. But there is a portrait of Boudica in Holinshed, and it's in profile. And I think if you look at the Queen Elizabeth I coins of the period, I think that image is actually of Elizabeth. I think it's so fascinating.
I love it. It's a personification. She's identifying as the same queen. That will also be featured in the exhibition, because portrait medals usually had a portrait of the queen or the ruler on one side. And on the other side, sometimes, especially as the Renaissance advances, like in the Elizabethan period, sometimes symbols, personifications, victory, or the defeat of the Armada in one of the medals. But also, one I wanted to bring up, Carole, the falcon, or sometimes the phoenix. So in one of the medals, the phoenix. Can you talk about the phoenix a bit more? Because I find the phoenix is one of my favorite creatures.
Well, I love that too. And I love that she saw the phoenix as kind of a symbol for her. And of course, the idea of the phoenix is that there's only one phoenix. And at the time, the phoenix death, and it's usually in a fire, and then out of that fire comes a new phoenix. And I think we could see Elizabeth seeing that, looking at her own life and looking at, as I said, I think she was terrified at times in her father's reign. I think in her brother's reign, when there was the investigation about her and Thomas Seymour, she thought that there's a really strong chance that this could lead to her not only being kicked out of the succession, but the end of her life. And then, of course, in Mary's reign, she is convinced. I mean, she says when she is in the tower, and it turns out they're actually taking her out of the tower to take her to Woodstock, but she sees these soldiers coming and she tells her people, pray for me for this night, I think, to die. And
Oh.
so I think that for her, she sees these terrible experiences and the way she rises above them, and frankly, the intense bravery and cleverness that she used. She was so young. I mean,
Mhm.
she's 15 when Tyrwood is examining her about her relationship with Thomas Seymour, and they keep telling her, if you just confess, it'll be all right. And of course, she refuses to do it. And the same thing is said to her in Mary's reign, and she absolutely refuses. And she knows first that she was not guilty, and second, that it would look terrible for her if she admitted she was. And she says, I'd rather stay in prison for my life than admit to something I have not done. So I think the phoenix is a perfect,
Mhm.
perfect symbol for her. And I think she chose it very deliberately.
Yes, and great work done recently. Found links between the Phoenix and points linking to Anne Boleyn. I think it's all got to do with the idea of today we would call it intense emotional trauma, and the Phoenix represents that, right? You
It does, but it also, and I think this is where we really see Elizabeth, and in some ways much more effective than Mary. Elizabeth also has a huge sense of resilience,
Mhm,
and so does the Phoenix. The Phoenix dies, but is
mhm.
reborn,
Yeah,
comes back. And
yeah.
I think for Elizabeth, because, and I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for Mary and the things that she went through and the things she went through with her mother and after her mother's death. And, it was also terrible when Catherine Howard was queen and the way she
Oh,
treated
yeah.
Mary. And
I
then,
was just a little girl too. We talked about that in the podcast before, you know. Maybe we should be talking more about Henry and his ways.
oh my gosh, absolutely. And then, of course, the way she was treated in Edward's reign was just appalling. And of course, if Northumberland had had his way, and he writes to both sisters that
Yeah.
Edward is saying the king is dying, he wants to die in his sister's arms, and of course Mary immediately takes off, and if she had gotten to London, that would have been her death. And luckily, there were those who were so opposed to Northumberland and the coup to put Jane Grey on the throne that Mary receives the word that her brother's actually dead, and then she says, I'm the Queen of England, and is amazing. But I think that what she went through was so tough, and I've thought a lot about this because, as I said, Catherine of Aragon with the supposed twin was a phantom pregnancy. And then Mary was, I mean, everyone was convinced Mary was pregnant before she would agree she was. But once she agreed, she was totally convinced. And of course, when Reginald Poole comes to England, she says, when he steps off the ship, I felt the baby move for the first time. And they kept postponing, oh, we got our timing wrong. And it was months where she was sure she was going to have a baby. Absolutely. And then, she finally says, one of her ladies was named Friedesweed, and she says, you were the only one. You said, no, you're not pregnant. And everyone else tried to continue it, and I should have listened to you. And then, of course, in the last year of her life, she is convinced again she is pregnant, and nobody takes it very seriously. But I think these were terrible experiences for
Yeah.
her. And I personally think it's after she doesn't have the child the first time that we really see the upsweep in the persecutions of Protestants. And I think
Yes.
in many ways, I think she felt she didn't have a baby because God was punishing her for not
Yeah.
really bringing England back thoroughly to the Catholic Church. And that's why she started to burn heretics.
I I think you're right, Carol, and I think that this thing with the heirs and the obsession of the Tudors drove them crazy. And that's why Elizabeth is the one who is like, nope, I'm not going to do this.
I'm not going to do
I'm going to
it.
go down a different route where I live a long life. England prospers, and then we'll talk about business, But I think you're right, because Mary is thrown into, I mean, I am convinced that Mary was a virgin when she married Philip. So my
Yes,
theory is that she could have perfectly had a ectopic pregnancy, some sort of gynecology issue triggered by her first sexual experiences, because they did do the deed. That was known. So I think that Mary, triggered something in there, and she was never seen by a gynecologist either. So, it's all rumors and this and that. So I think that probably had a profound impact on her sister Elizabeth. When Catherine of Aragon has her first stillbirth and all that, she writes a letter to her dad saying, "I didn't write to you before because I had to see if things were okay with the king." The English were very superstitious about stillbirth and miscarriages and things like that. So the Queen could lose a favor, like it happened to Anne Boleyn, when something went wrong in pregnancy or in the early stages, or you had issues with your, because you're trying to have a baby. And this is an issue today for women. You're trying to have a baby. It's hard sometimes if you're going through emotional stress, if you're going, 37, it's not an ideal biological age. Just both in that sense, I think that Elizabeth learned that lesson very well, and that's
I
why
think
she decided, nope, not for me.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I really, really do think so. And I would also just point out, and I've published on this, that it wasn't simply Mary who had this phantom pregnancy. There were a number of women who did. And if you read the medical texts of the time, one of them says, you can't know a woman is really pregnant until she gives birth.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so it was not, I mean, I get upset when people kind of mock Mary because of, oh, I'm
Yeah.
pregnant. She wasn't, because I think, as I say, at first she did accept it, and then once she did, she was vehement about it, but that is not unusual. I mean, that
Yeah.
happened to Lady Lisle in her last marriage, and
Mm-hmm.
it happened to Ambrose Dudley's, I think his first
Mm-hmm.
wife. So there were a number of phantom pregnancies, and I think phantom pregnancy is much better description than hysterical pregnancy, which I find very nasty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
degrading, insulting.
Yeah, and at the same time, Mary's going through a process of asserting her power, because not everybody's accepting her power, of marrying this guy who's like, well, then we have to go back to the Catholic Church, and she's agreeing with that, but England has changed forever, and
Absolutely.
it's not the time for that anymore, and that's why I think, the last year and a half of Mary is just a mess, because she's a mess, because she's trying to do the impossible, really, right?
I want to go back to the issue of Mary, as I say, her phantom pregnancy and Elizabeth seeing that. I also think she looked at her husband's wives. So he gets rid of, in terms of annulling the marriage of Catherine because she doesn't have a son who survives. Her mother is executed.
Yeah.
And of course, she had an early miscarriage in 1535 and then the serious one in January of 1536.
Yeah.
Jane Seymour dies because of the
Yeah.
disease after childbirth.
Yeah.
Anne of Cleves, who knows? I doubt
runs and hides.
Yeah, it was even never consummated, and Henry just says, oh, "I'm getting rid of her." He executes Catherine Parr. I'm sorry, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr almost is arrested and put in the Tower when they're having that fight over religion. So I think she looks at this and says, "What is the point of marriage and trying to have a child?"
Right.
Yeah. Can I just say, as somebody who has been married and in a very long relationship with that person, to go from being married and then divorced and being single, there is some appeal to it. It is nice to just be able to be your own person and not have to answer to anybody. I get it. I get it.
I think it's really felt that way.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about the musical Six because I don't feel like they portray the queens as well as they should, except for Anne of Cleves. I love the portrayal of her and where she's pretending to cry and then kicking up her heels because Henry rejected her, because I think that is so true. I mean, and one of the funny things about Anne is there were some questions after that marriage annulled, was Anne of Cleves pregnant or not? And there was actually an investigation, but I think she was so upset when she was married to Henry, and it was so stressful she couldn't eat. And then she's on her own. She gets an allowance. She's wearing new dresses, and she's probably
Susanna Horenboot is head of her house. Susanna Horenboot, the famous artist, is her head of her household. And she has a lavish life, and she has a relationship with Mary, and she lives on, and with Elizabeth. I mean, she has. You know what would be good to analyze? Maybe the relationship between the women tends to be good until one of them is in power, and in this sense, parallel lives Mary and Elizabeth. I would bring up Lady Jane Grey and Mary Queen of Scots, but also, once you're in power, it's very different.
Well, with Anne of Cleves, of course, she rides with Elizabeth in the second carriage for Mary's coronation. Mary, there is, in the last year or so of Anne of Cleves' life, Mary does not treat her as well as she ought to, and that's
well, that's what I'm saying about Mary. I think Mary's just caught up in a very problematic situation that she can't really control, and she's lashing out in many ways and respects, because she's desperate, because she doesn't see her project succeeding. Probably if it would have extended a few years, it would have been. I mean, imagine losing Calais. Right?
That, of course, was all her husband's fault, because he got England at war with France again. And, I think, didn't she say, when they open my body, Calais will be engraved on my heart?
Yeah.
Well, Calais had been, her mother had been there. That's where Susanna Horenboot gave Charles V the miniature of it. Like, Calais was a big deal. Her father's campaigns in the north of France had been a big deal. Her mother's regency in 1513, defeating the Scots. She came from a military background too. Her grandmother. So a military defeat like that, to lose the last European possession of England in the continent, that quote is accurate, I think. And probably she didn't say that, she said something similar.
Yes.
Because that was one of the great faults of Mary's reign, really, the losing that, and losing really, a bit of that independence that England had after with Elizabeth, and a bit of the weather that helps, and the channel too. Carole, you can't lie about that for the Armada, right? We're gonna send it tomorrow. There's gonna be a storm. Philip is like, nah, send it anyway. It'll be fine.
But it is one of the things that's very interesting. The early years of Elizabeth's reign, she keeps negotiating, trying to get Calais back, and of course, she can't. But it takes her several years before she realizes that's just not going to happen. And it's just as Mary is distraught about it, I think Elizabeth, and that's a real parallel, is equally distraught and really, she wants Calais is the last thing they held. You're absolutely right. When the 100 Years' War ended, that all they had was the port city of Calais. And so to lose that, I think, was devastating to both sisters.
Yeah. Emma, do you think that, and I'm no expert on either of these women, but I think I read somewhere once that the difference between Mary and Elizabeth was that Mary allowed Philip to kind of handle more of the foreign affairs, whereas Elizabeth more took it upon herself and her advisors. Maybe you both can argue that.
Well, in that case, Carole can start, and then I'll refute her. No.
I think that in many ways, once Philip was there, she was in some ways dominated by him, and wanted very much to make him happy, to make that alliance work very well. I think, honestly, even though there's all this, Philip's the king, I think Mary never thought of herself not as the important queen.
Yeah.
But I think it's true that for Elizabeth, and in the end, she made these decisions. She listened a lot to, especially William Cecil, Frances Walsingham, but she made the final decisions herself on foreign and domestic affairs. And again, that's, I think, one reason she absolutely did not want to marry, because she knew the pressure of a husband would be, oh, you're the queen, but the wife obeys the husband, and she did not want to ever do that.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, so all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast gems.
I completely agree with Carole. But I would say in this sense, Mary would parallel better with her grandmother, Isabel I of Castile, and Fernando, who also took a lot of Isabel's power in Castile, and they had to do it. Mary knew that when she married Philip, she was giving away her power, part of her power, a large part of her power. But it was necessary to her because that's what she grew up knowing. That's the alliance her mother had established. She was going to marry Charles V, and she ends up marrying Charles V's son, Philip. It's just, to her, that's the way to protect England. In her mindset, that was the way to protect England from the threat of the advance of the Protestant faith. And that's the way she saw it. So Philip was, I think she saw things in the long run, because just Spain was becoming so massive, because it's not just Spain, it's the Habsburg Empire and all their alliances. So it's when you make allies with such a big power, you know, it's difficult. And then he was a man. And he was made king to marry. He was 27, so he was at the height of his manhood in many ways and respects. And even though he came and they got along, he asserted his power because it was his time. That Mary helped him to become the powerful king that then he became. It was during Mary's reign that he saw, for example, Lavina Turnlick, who then on goes to have a very successful career in Elizabeth's reign, paint pictures and do things. Yes. And then he hires recruits Sofonisba Anguissola for his third wife. Philip learned a lot from Mary, took advantage in many things, but learned a lot too. However, I think one of the things that we must remember is Mary was very respected in the Spanish monarchy too. And that's why we have such an iconic portrait in the Prado Museum of her. So I think where do you see her? If you see her from the Catholic perspective, she's admired. You see it from a Protestant perspective, she's not admired. And we're not going to solve that, because that's the way it is, right?
Well, I think that it's, again, the winners write the history. And in England, they certainly, the term Bloody Mary, pretty quickly. And
delicious drink, by the way.
I agree.
Yes.
I toast.
When are we going to get together and have some Bloody Marys, Carole?
Well, I think we need to plan this.
We need to make it happen. Rebecca's joining us, okay?
Okay. So I wanted to mention, and that I also wrote a 1-act, 1-woman play about Queen Elizabeth.
Yes.
And it is going to be, and I didn't mention this before, but it's going to actually have its premiere in Denver the third weekend in September, if Denver is a possibility.
Wow, congratulations on that, Carole.
Really excited. And then it's going to be part of the Solo Play Festival in New York at the end of October. And then it is going to be performed at the Newberry Library in Chicago on Thursday, November 20th. And I would be delighted. I can send to Rebecca and Emma more information. They can put out the information to all their listeners. and of exactly where the plays are performed and getting tickets for it. I will mention that the Newberry Library, which is very thrilling, it's going to be free. People can
Oh, that
go.
is amazing,
And
Carole.
that is amazing and so wonderful. And the play does at one point talk about Elizabeth it's the end of her reign and she's thinking about her life. And she does talk at one point about her sister Mary and
Oh,
what
does
would
she?
happen to her during
Mm.
Mary's reign.
Oh, I'm getting emotional now. I mean, Chicago. I love Chicago. I'm sure we have many listeners from Chicago.
Yeah.
One of my
Well,
favorite cities in the US. I always say
I'm
that
really
whenever I mention a US city, but Chicago is pretty cool.
I would be thrilled if people see it. It was at the Edinburgh Fringe in August, and that was one of the highlights of my life. And I'm just very, very proud of it because I wanted to show, how amazing Elizabeth was, but I wanted to do it kind of historically correctly. And, all of the films that show Mary Stuart and Elizabeth and their grand confrontation about each
Hmm.
other, that never happened. We
Right.
have the amazing letters that they wrote each other and Elizabeth's advice to her cousin, but the two never met. And so I really used a lot of their letters, her speeches, to make it both, I think, dramatically important, but also historically accurate. And I'm really proud of it.
Oh,
You are truly a
congratulations.
Renaissance woman. You are, Carole.
May
I
I
mean,
also,
Carole has a production that you can't even. If you ever try to look it up, you'll get overwhelmed and you'll think you'll never have time to do anything remotely similar. You're so talented, Carole. You had to do so many things. I'm very excited for this. I hope we can make it happen.
I
Either
hope so.
Chicago, New York. It sounds so amazing.
And
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention I have a book in press that will be out this fall. And I asked three incredibly wonderful and talented women to do the book with me. So there are four of us, and it's called Creatively Expanding the Pre-Modern Historical and Literary Afterlives. And it's creative pieces with a lot of scholarly apparatus about them, and then also information about how to use creative work in teaching college classes. And it's coming out with Routledge, and it's coming out simultaneously paperback and hardback. And of course, scholarly paperbacks are more expensive, but they're still much more reasonable in price than hardback books. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh,
Yeah, your
Carole,
creativity is amazing. So
it
this is a book
is.
that you have to put on your list right away.
Yes, and it has been such an honor to have you on the show with us today. I feel like it took way too long for me to have you on the show, but I'm so glad you were able to come on today and share your knowledge on Elizabeth I and the Tudors with us. So thank you very much.
Yes,
It
thank you
was
so
so
much.
much my pleasure. And as I said, I admire both of you so much. And it was a joy for me to have this wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Carole. I'm going to propose that one day we meet in London for Bloody Marys, and then we go and see the tombs of the sisters, the two sisters, because they were sisters, and that's the way we should remember them as pioneering women. Like Carole has explained for Elizabeth I, and the book that she's been so graciously helping me to edit. That I promise, Carole, I will hand in very soon. Don't kill me. Um, will just be a little grain of what Carole has done with Mary, but I hope it opens the door because I know Carole is very excited about it and I just hope she likes it. I really do.
I know that I will. I've read the proposals and I'm so excited about it and so excited about your exhibit. So thank you again for all of this.
Thank you. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks for listening to Tudors Dynasty and Beyond. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a new release. And if you loved it, leave a quick review. It helps more history lovers find the show. Want to support the podcast and get bonus content? Head to patreon.com/tutorsdynasty. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode.